We got you covered too.
If I got it backwards, let me know.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Final decision.
What are all these? We're supposed to pass these down.
Yeah, we have
Why do I have a stack of them?
Hey, Pete, you have an extra pen?
There you go, then you have to, we've got them over here, so. Yeah, we've got them.
It should be like 10 copies of the packet which has the NEMA stuff on it.
What is this about?
How are you?
Bill have one? With some additional comments.
Okay, Paul Edgar's, I've got that.
There was nothing here when I said that.
Oh, this is Paul Edgar's attachment. All right.
Yeah, he didn't get the extra, the Kenema package.
I didn't read all this.
Did you get the other letter?
Yeah, I got the second one that just came around now.
Okay, from Sandra Lawson? Yes, okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna get a notepad.
When we win, we don't win. But we won. We're doing what you told us.
We're recording, so anytime.
Ready? Pete, are you ready? Okay. So I'm going to call to order the Monday, February 10th, 2020 meeting of the Oregon City Planning Commission. Before we begin, would anybody like to make a comment on any item not on the agenda? Any comment cards?
Not on non-agenda items, we're good.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, moving on, moving into public hearings. We have 4 public hearings tonight. We're going to start with item 3A, GLUA-19-0053, a general land use application, and SP-19-00-141, a minor site plan and design review. As this is a quasi-judicial hearing, I have a quasi-judicial script. All right, we have 2 public hearings on, we're going to do 3 public hearings? Okay, 3 public hearings on land use applications are scheduled tonight. Our role is to conduct the public hearing and to make decisions about the matter before us. In making those decisions, we must apply applicable codes and laws and cannot vary from or change those laws or codes. Members of the Planning Commission are to be unbiased. Before the start of the hearing, I'll ask the commissioners whether they have any potential conflicts, such as family, financial, or business relationships, with any of the applicants or with regard to the land in question. I will also ask whether any of the commissioners have discussed the application in question with any of the parties or have independent knowledge of relevant facts, such as from a visit to the site in question. Any member of the audience may question any commissioner about their disclosures. A staff report has been prepared for each application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the first public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the commission will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown on the chart on the wall. Anyone wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's card and give it to the planning staff before the hearing. Speakers will proceed in the order in which their card is received. You should fill out your address on the card so the city will notify you of its final decision. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name and city of residence. Testimony and evidence should be directed towards the applicable approval criteria. If you believe any criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. Any person may submit written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, oversized poster boards, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in their oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to the city staff while the record is open. If they are not given to staff, they will not be included in the record. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Planning Commission makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised on the record for the consideration of the City Commission or LUBA or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient detail and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond to the same issue will not be deemed appealable to the City Commission or State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow the government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. All right. Now we will open the record for Oregon City file number GLUA-19-00053, General Land Use Application, and SP-19-00141, a minor site plan and design review. Before we begin, I'm going to ask all the commissioners if they have had any ex parte contacts, any conflicts of interest, and if they have visited the site. After which any member of the audience can question one of the commissioners on their disclosures. So, Commissioner Staggs.
No,
Do you
I
have
have
any
not.
ex parte contacts?
No,
No conflicts of interest? Did you visit the site?
no.
Okay. Commissioner Johnson?
I visited the site, no conflict of interest.
No ex parte contact?
contact.
Okay. Commissioner Staggs?
Stoll?
Stoll. I'm sorry.
That's fine. No ex parte contact. I have not visited the site recently, and no conflicts of interest.
Okay.
No ex parte contact, I did not visit the site, and no conflicts of interest.
Okay, so for the record, commissioners have spoken. Would anybody in the audience care to question any of the commissioners on their statements? Okay, seeing none, we'll now begin with the planning staff report. Who has that?
Thank you. So
This
this
is Leona.
is planning file GLUA 1953 and SB 19141. I know we have a full agenda tonight, so I'm going to try and breeze through, but let me know if you have questions. Do you mind full screening that, Pete?
Yeah.
I didn't get that.
Does it work?
It's not working. Oh, is it not on? Okay, got it. So this is an application for a modification of a prior application for the properties at 202 Malala Avenue and 221 Malala Avenue. 202 Malala is developed with an existing single-family home, and 221 Malala Avenue is developed with an office building and associated parking lots. So last year, the Planning Commission reviewed an application which proposed to divide the property at 202 Malala into two parcels, retaining the existing single-family home on parcel 2, and then proposing a 10-stall parking lot to serve the office building across the street on parcel 1. that application was conditionally approved by the Planning Commission, and the approved application included a condition of approval to underground the existing utility lines that serve the existing single-family house at 202 Malala. The utility lines in question that were required to be undergrounded are shown in red on the left-hand side, and there's a Google Street View image that shows what they look like. So after the land use review and after the Planning Commission approval, the applicant went through a review process with our engineering division to review all the public improvements. And during that process, they also coordinated with PGE on the undergrounding of these utilities. And during that review, PGE determined that the relocation or undergrounding of those utility lines cannot be authorized. And compliance with the condition would require some significant changes to PG's utility network that go beyond just the property's frontage. So they would have to go down the street in order to facilitate the undergrounding of these utilities. So that puts the applicant in a tough position because now they can't comply with the condition of approval to underground the utilities. So they are before you tonight requesting that that condition of approval is removed from the original review. So our code allows an applicant to do this through this major modifications process. This process requires that any change that renders the approved permit incompatible with any of the conditions of approval requires the application to return through the same process as the original review. So this is before you again because the original application was a Type 3 Planning Commission application. So there are findings in the staff report for the modification, but I'll quickly summarize here. Again, PG is not authorizing the undergrounding of the utilities. Complying with the condition of approval would require some significant changes to PG's network beyond the property's frontage, which would not be roughly proportional to the impacts of the proposed development. And existing utilities in this area are also above ground, so the development would be consistent with surrounding properties, and I've included some street view images of the adjacent properties to show what the above ground utilities look like in this area. And again, they're not proposing any new above ground utilities, only for the existing above ground utilities to remain as they are. So we're recommending approval of this modification application. We don't have any conditions of approval for the modification, but the development still is subject to compliance with all of the conditions of approval from the prior review, with the exception of condition 15, which would be removed if you approve the modification application. And I can answer any questions.
Okay, so this is it the same application? It's just been a modified application? The one condition has been removed, or is it?
Yeah, the application is to remove that condition of approval.
Okay, all right, any questions from the commissioners?
It's the same applicant
Yes.
that was there?
No other questions?
No.
Okay. Then now I should open the public record at this point. Okay, we'll open the public record. We will hear from the applicant. You have up to 15 minutes if you need it. Applicant doesn't have to speak. You're good? Okay. Any member of a recognized neighborhood association, government agency, or any incorporated public interest organization wishing to speak? Okay. Any public comments? Do we have any comment cards?
Not for this item, no.
Okay. Close the public record. Close the public record. And we can deliberate and ask more questions of the staff, or someone care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion
Okay,
that we approve, well, regarding
yeah.
the whole thing,
Just the GLUA.
GLUA 1953 and SP 19-141, that we approve this and remove the condition 15. Is that the proper way? Okay.
Do we have a second? Okay, I have a first and a second. Call roll.
Commissioner Staggs,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Schlagenhofer,
Aye.
Commissioner Gage,
Aye.
Commissioner Stoll.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. All right, moving along. We're doing well. Item 3B, GLUA-190035, General Land Use Application, CU 19-00003, Conditional Use. Is this for this one? Okay. SP 20-00011, Site Plan and Design Review, VAR-20-00001 through VAR-20-00003, variances for a temporary construction staging area with a gravel driveway and 10 construction trailers at 1321 Lynn Avenue. I'm going to ask the commissioners the same questions. Does anybody, Commissioner Staggs, do you have any conflicts of interest, ex parte contact? Did you visit the site?
No, I do not, and I have not visited the site.
Okay, Commissioner Johnson?
No site visit, no conflict, no special interest.
Okay. Commissioner Stoll?
I drove by this afternoon, but otherwise no to everything else.
Okay.
No,
Gage?
no ex parte, no conflict, and no site visit.
Okay, and I guess I should mention that I have no ex parte contact. I did not visit the site, but I drove past it, and I had no ex parte contact. Would anybody care to question any of the commissioners on their statements? Okay, seeing no questions, we will go to the staff report.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Kelly Reed. I'm a planner with Oregon City. I'm going to start by passing out hard copies of additional emails and comments that were sent to you, emailed to you today, just in case you didn't see those emails yet. And these emails and letters are in response to Planning Commissioner Mike Mitchell's comments that were emailed last week and
Right.
published in the revised agenda last week.
Okay,
Okay, so I'll get started.
Thank you.
So this is an application for a conditional use site plan design review and 3 variances to have a construction staging area on the Presbyterian Church property at Lynn Avenue and Warner Milne Road. The site is in the R2 multifamily or high-density residential zone. Religious institutions are conditional use in that zone. So the property has an existing conditional use for a religious institution and a preschool. So this conditional use application would amend that existing conditional use to add a construction staging area with a duration of 12 to 18 months to support the construction of Gardner Middle School on the neighboring property. So let's see if you all can see my pointer here. About half of the property is undeveloped, and That's where the construction area is proposed in this general location. Gardner Middle School is planned to be constructed on the property just to the north. Normally, we see construction staging areas occur on the same site as the construction is occurring, and so this request doesn't typically come up. Sometimes the staging area is in the area that's in the right-of-way, but we never really see staging areas proposed on totally separate properties. In this case, I think because the school wishes to remain in operation during construction, and so they're phasing construction in that way, there's just not any room on the school site to accommodate the staging area, and so the school district is working with their neighbors to provide that offsite. So that's why we're seeing it. Normally, it wouldn't even be reviewed. It's just understood that a construction site needs a staging area. So the plan for the staging area includes, again, 12 to 18 months duration of a gravel area with the driveway from Warner Milne Road, 10 temporary buildings, and 25 parking spaces. Buildings range in size from 400 square feet to 1,440 square feet. These are examples of what those buildings would look like. Our code has an allowance for temporary buildings such as this that are exempt. When we have a temporary building, those are exempt from many of the design standards in our code. Our code allows such temporary buildings to be in place for very limited durations of time. So one of the variances that the applicant has requested is to allow a longer time period for these temporary buildings to remain on site. Normally, the city would allow a temporary building for a maximum of 30 days. And so 18 months is the maximum request by the school district. So from neighboring areas, just to show you what it looks like, this is Williams Street, which if we go back, is that kind of dead end area. So Williams Street kind of dead ends into the back of the church property. And there are a few residential homes and properties on that street. So the school district and the church has proposed to have access to the construction area, not from Williams Street, but from Warner Milne Road instead, in order to reduce the impacts of noise and construction trucks in the residential area. And then here's the view from Warner Milne Road. We're looking at the neighboring PGE site with the row of trees that screens that site from the church property. So the proposed access to the construction site is from this existing curb cut right here on Warner Milne Road. The applicant would widen that driveway to 25 feet to allow for two-way traffic for trucks and workers. Our Development Services Department has recommended a condition of approval that the applicant remove that driveway, that curb cut, and rebuild the ADA sidewalk after construction. And that's the view of it from the other side, looking west on Warner Milne Road. There is this kind of center area of the road. It's not actually a turn lane, but it is wide enough to accommodate if vehicles are coming down Warner Milne and they want to turn left onto that driveway, they can get out of the travel lane by using that center lane. And so the traffic study that was done for this application describes that, and the city's traffic consultant, John Ripplinger, reviewed that and agreed that that could be utilized. So there are 3 proposed variances First one is to allow the parking lot to remain gravel instead of being paved, and to not have landscaping. And the reason for that is that it's a parking lot that's only going to be there for 12 to 18 months. The second variance is a variance to not require non-conforming upgrades. I'll explain that a little bit more later. Third variance is the request to allow the temporary structures to be there for 18 months rather than just 7 to 30 days. And so just to remind you, our variance criteria, we're really looking at impacts on neighboring properties. We're looking at whether there are practical alternatives, and whether the applicant is adequately mitigating any impacts that the variance results in. And so for the first variance, we've found that there really will be no impacts for having the gravel parking lot with no landscaping, because it's only 12 to 18 months. It's pretty far removed from any neighboring properties, and the dust that might result from vehicles on that gravel driveway would be limited. The applicant does propose dust control measures, such as wetting the gravel, keeping it damp, and limiting the speed of the trucks and cars that use it. So we don't recommend any conditions of approval for that variance. The second variance would allow them to avoid any non-conforming upgrades. Normally, if a property is expanding in either parking lot or building area, and their non-conforming site, then we require up to 10% of that project cost be devoted to upgrading non-conforming elements of the site. And there's a list of elements that usually includes pedestrian connectivity, bicycle parking, and landscaping. And so based on the project cost here, this variance would result in a lack of up to $36,000 in site upgrades. So there's no necessarily no impact to neighboring properties from that variance, but we would lose out on any site upgrades for the church property. Because of the, again, temporary nature of this application, we found that the purpose of non-conforming upgrades is not being compromised by this request. And the applicant proposed mitigation of tree plantings. So I'll talk about the tree plantings in the next variance, because it's kind of related to that one as well. Sure. Third variance is to, again, allow these temporary structures to be there for up to 18 months. There is a visual impact of having construction trailers on a highly visible site on a very busy road for 18 months rather than 30 days, which is what our code allows. So what we recommend, based on conversations with the applicant and the proposal for the tree planting mitigation, is the planting of 4 trees on the site, and to ensure that the site is returned to its original state after construction. So that there's no remnants of any of the gravel or the construction trailers once they're finished. And regarding the locations of those trees, so the large undeveloped portion of the property, has a lot of development potential. And I think staff and the applicant would prefer not to plant trees in locations where they might not be compatible with any sort of future development. So choosing tree locations on more of the already developed church half of the site seems to make more sense. And so much of that property has a good tree canopy and screening, landscaping screening already. But this area right here on the southern boundary of the site, along Warner Milne Road, to the west of the driveway, it would not conflict with any future development of the vacant half of the site. And currently there are just some larger shrubs there. So I think this would be a good location for those tree plantings. And it would be in a place where they probably would be able to remain instead of being removed for a development project in the future. So that is the only condition that's recommended related to the variances. And the staff recommendation overall is approval with conditions. And I do want to note that the list of conditions in your staff report had some typos. The first 3 actually should not be there at all. So I apologize for that. But so the clarification would be to remove conditions number 1, 2, and 3.
Move 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, I guess I have, the only question I have is, since the property is being basically borrowed for, 18 months, and then the mitigation on the trees, as much as I like the mitigation of trees, what does the property owner feel about it? Do they even want trees put back since they don't have any now? Could the mitigation be off-site if the church decided they didn't want trees planted in that area?
Well, I think what we've heard from the applicant is that this condition is acceptable to them. And planting the trees on the site, even though they're not going to be directly in front of the staging area, they're not going to provide direct screening. They will be placed in a way that, does provide some visual screen from some angles of that staging area. And so if they were planted off-site, then they probably wouldn't provide any, they wouldn't be related to, mitigating that impact.
Okay, so part of the trees, part of the reasoning behind the trees is to provide some screening. So are they going to be large trees that are planting?
Well, they would be planting larger trees. The survival rate is not so great. So younger trees actually end up surviving. They have more success in surviving in the long term. So we don't recommend planting trees any larger than 2-inch caliber. Again, the species of those trees, they could grow up to be big trees, but they're not going to grow very much in the next 18 months.
Right, so they're not really going to do much before it's all gone.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Well, that's about all I've got. We should probably hear from the applicant before we go too far. Any questions from the commissioners for staff?
Is the property owner required to keep those trees after 18 months? I mean, do they need a permit? Is there to remove them or?
Yeah, so because they are a non-residential property or a non-single family residential property, tree removal is subject to a type 1 site plan and mitigation is required. So that said, tree removal standards only apply to trees that are greater than 6-inch diameter. So until they're 6 inches, we wouldn't actually regulate them. Something we do sometimes is that if a tree is required to be planted as a condition of approval, then we require a covenant be recorded on it. That's something that the Planning Commission could add if you're, concerned that the church might cut them down after a couple of years.
Could we look at the site plan to show, and could you point out where the trees are planned?
Well, the condition of approval just says that the applicant would work with staff to select locations that are visible from the right-of-way and are placed somewhere between the building or the parking lot and the street. So where I suggested is in this location right here. So it avoids planting trees in this part of the site that would potentially be, they might conflict with future redevelopment plans. But you can see the remainder of the site, there's ample tree cover farther west, and then along Lynn Avenue, there's a lot of smaller trees that line the parking lot as well. And so more trees in that there wouldn't really add as much as they would in this location where there aren't any currently.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any members of the church management here to make statements? No?
We did get the letter,
We got a letter from them?
that
How do
was
you feel about the trees?
in the revised agenda. I don't think that trees were mentioned in the letter.
Okay, because it's their property. I feel like we should be asking them what they think, because the applicant isn't a property owner. So it would make sense to me that we get some input from the property owner. Unless they didn't mention they had an issue with it.
The letter does not mention that there's any issue with
Okay.
it, but it
All
doesn't
right.
specifically mention it either. The folks who are here to speak may be able to add more.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll hear from the applicant before we go any further. Okay, so,
One question
Sure,
before
go
we leave
ahead.
that. I don't know that anybody knows where those trees can be planted today.
right,
I
it
think
sounds like there's some options.
it's a topic down the road that the 3 or 4 parties get together and say, how does it fit best and
Okay.
where do we want that? And that option is in this proposal, I believe, that it will be determined later
Okay,
where the trees are. That somebody's going to get together and say,
Okay.
here's where we want them, we'll keep them here for a while. I don't know what the commitments are for keeping them, or
Yeah.
have to get a permit to cut them down because if they're in the wrong
Right.
place, a year and a half later, you cut them. It shouldn't be that big of a decision, and it will be
Doesn't
made
sound
by
like it will be.
the appropriate people, I think.
okay. All right. Anything else? Okay, so at this point, we should open the public record for public comments, and we'll hear from the applicant. So up to 15 minutes, please state your name and city of residence.
Wes Rogers, I'm the bond program manager for Oregon City School District, and I live on Summit Street here in Oregon City. I've been a longtime resident.
Thank you.
Oh, good evening, members of the Planning Commission. It's good to be back. I was here recently for the land use application for the main construction site for replacing Gardner Middle School. Tonight, of course, we're discussing a temporary construction staging area that includes an access road off Warner Milne to the construction site, with the goal of trying to limit as much as possible impacts on any of the neighbors that are surrounding the current school site. And you can see by the site map that it does provide direct access off Warner Milne to the construction site. And getting to Warner Milne is pretty direct off of Highway 213, because it'd be 213 to Beaver Creek Road at Warner Milne, and then they're into the site, and then they would return the same way. I would say that we've, again, tried to limit as much negative impact as possible. We want to, again, talk about that this is going to be a construction staging area for 18 months. When the new school is occupied by students, then construction activities will move to the northern side of the property, and the existing school will be abated of hazardous materials and then removed from the site, and then new play fields will be constructed. And the limited number of construction trailers needed for that will be relocated over there on the north side of the property. And the church is definitely agreeable to the condition to return the property back to its original condition. And we would reuse the ground on the construction site itself. So we aren't wasting any money by buying a bunch of gravel, because we'll use it on the construction site on the other side of the property. So we're more than happy to remove it and to use it. And we're also going to be removing the backstop and some other things that are right next to the staging area. We did see the comments from Commissioner Mitchell about his concerns about traffic count numbers, dust control measures, and arrangement of the construction trailers in the staging area. I believe Ms. Reed handed out the responses from our contractor, Pence Construction, and some comments from our traffic engineers with Lancaster Mobley. And we believe that those answer those concerns satisfactorily from our standpoint, but we're here to take some questions on those if you have some follow-up questions about those. And as to Mr. Mitchell's comments about additional tree mitigation, we're looking at that. All that we're concerned with as city staff has shared is that we really want to make sure that investment is put in a place that can be utilized for many, many years to come. And if the church were to redevelop that site, we would be disappointed to see those trees be removed. And that's pretty much our concern about that. I have had several conversations with the church representative, the same person who submitted the letter to city staff, and they're very open and agreeable to tree planting, but they're concerned about where exactly are the trees going to go. So in our minds, we'd get together with city staff and the church property owner, and then and talk about where is the best place to locate those trees and what would be the most appropriate species for those. So make sure that they look nice as they grow, and they serve a purpose to shade some of the property and provide some visual benefit along the right-of-way. And with that, we wanted to keep our comments pretty short tonight, so I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Anybody have comments, questions for Mr. Rogers?
Will there be material storage on this staging site?
No. When you say material storage, do you mean?
A couple pallets of lumber?
No, that'll all be,
Like that.
when that's needed, that will all be stored over. There's a staging area just to the south of the track.
Okay.
And that's where the material storage will be for construction. There's a buffer there that is parking and some other improvements that on the building site. That's where the materials will be staged.
Thank you.
Anything?
Yes, sir.
So the roadway is just an access across the church property to get to the
Correct.
school property for staging your material
That
and
is
your
correct.
daily deliveries, or sometimes you'll have deliveries of gravel trucks for days at a time to.
They'll during different phases of the project, of course, there'll be truck traffic coming and going. And on days of large concrete pours, there'll obviously be more truck traffic than normal. And there'll be some times when deliveries of large materials will need to be coordinated, I'm sure, because of the fact they're hauling some long items or some large items. And so that's typical of a large construction. We're building a school of 150,000 square feet. That's 2 stories tall. So we will have some days when we're going to be bringing in some large material loads, but we're definitely want to mitigate that as much as stay away from rush hour traffic, try to get those on site as early as possible during the day before traffic gets going, or go for the middle part of the day. So we'll be sensitive to traffic patterns in the city. And we have the ability, working with the subcontractors, to really work with them about adhering to those.
One follow-up to that is, I think I'd read someplace in here, somebody had an issue with, will all delivery truck drivers and all that be notified as to where the delivery
Yeah.
point is, and they're not going to end up over in the schoolyard
Correct.
competing with
That- yep.
buses and.
Good question. So Pence Construction, the general contractor, assures us that in the subcontractor agreements, it'll state that they are to use Beaver Creek, Highway 213, Beaver Creek Road, Warner Milne Road to access the site. And that's going to be in their contracts. And I'm sure that they will hear about it if they are not following those. And if needed, we are more than, reasonably the expectation. If we needed to put no construction access signs up, we could do that as well. And directing them back over to where the Warner Milne entrance is. But most people will probably want, if they do follow our directions, it'll be easy to see the construction access site. It'll be well marked. And with the construction trailers, they'll know that they're going to pull in there and go right by them into the site. So that's our response to the concern about that. Is we can't guarantee that it won't happen, but we can guarantee that we're doing everything we can to try and prevent it from happening.
Okay. I know Commissioner Mitchell had a question about, concern about dust. But what about mud, as far as the initial excavation when they're building the road in there? Is there going to be some kind of tire cleaners system to?
I'm sure if we get in there and it's wet and gumbo and clay, that we'll be doing that, as well as erosion control. We'll go through the necessary steps of erosion control permit and so forth. So yeah, we'll be watching that closely.
Okay.
Once the gravel gets down, then it's just a matter of maintaining the gravel.
Right.
Not high speeds, but you still can generate a little bit of dust there. So we'll water it as needed and maintain that and keep an eye on it.
Okay. And then on the curb cut, I remember there were, staff mentioned the curb cut. They're cutting it out, expanding it, making it bigger for trucks.
The turning radius of trucks that they need to swing, to come into the site.
Right.
And allow trucks to come out at the same time, so that we're not creating bottlenecks of trucks idling and waiting and,
Right.
and running, that they can get out, in and out of the same driveway.
Okay, but then afterwards, they wanted it reduced back down?
Correct, yeah, we'll construct it
But
for
it's
the
gonna be
city's
88.
expectations, right?
Okay.
Yeah. The church uses that, I believe, for one of their access points for some of their mowing equipment and so
Okay.
forth onto
All
the
right.
site. So
That makes sense. Okay. Those were my concerns. Anything else? Okay, I guess that's it. Thank
Great,
you.
Thank you.
Okay, where was that one? So I guess any member of a, where did my list go? Government agency, what's the other one? Neighborhood association or any other organization like that care to comment? No, we don't have any, do we have any public comments on this?
No, we don't.
No public comments. I guess everybody's happy with it. Okay, I will close the public, the hearing for public comments. And we'll discuss this. Any more questions for the staff, or would someone like to make a motion?
Could you bring up the last slide, the request for
The variance?
conditions, yeah?
Looks like it stopped working. Oh. Looks like we're frozen. Does the mouse work?
Maybe the mouse will work.
Guess we won't be able to do 3C.
Which one are you looking for? Last slide?
Oh, the one that one, yep, oh, yep, right there. Yeah,
Yes, sir.
I'll make a motion. Motion to approve with conditions and remove conditions 1, 2, and 3 from the list.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
And approve with conditions GLUA 19-00035?
Yes.
Okay,
Who was the second, sorry?
Second.
Okay.
Commissioner Gage. Okay,
Commissioner Staggs?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Schlagenhofer?
aye.
Commissioner Gage?
Aye.
Commissioner Stoll?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay. Moving on. Let me find it. Okay. We'll do this one a little different. Let's open the public record. Legislative LEG agenda item 3C, LEG-19-000006. Natural Resources Overlay District Map Amendment, addition of Kanema Wetland to the Natural Resources Overlay District. Has anybody new come in? All right. So, at this point, I'm going to ask the commissioners if they have any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, or visited the site. Commissioner Staggs.
I'll be recusing myself from this agenda item.
Okay. Thank you.
I drove
Commissioner
by the site to ex parte contact,
Okay.
special interested.
Okay. Commissioner Stoll.
I drove by, but there's not much to see from the road. There's no ex parte contact or conflict of interest.
Okay, Commissioner Gage, any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, and did you visit the site?
None of the above.
All right, and for myself, I have had no ex parte contacts, no conflicts of interest, and I did not visit the site. Okay. So I guess that opens it up for the staff report.
Thank you.
Questions?
Oh, would any of the members of the audience care to question any of the commissioners on the statements they've made? Okay, no.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Walter.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I'm Pete Walter, Senior Planner. This legislative file is a proposal to include a wetland and its associated vegetative corridor within the city's Natural Resources Overlay District by amending the overlay district map. And the effect of this amendment, if it is approved, would be to apply the protections and the standards of Oregon City Municipal Code Chapter 17.49, which is our Natural Resources Overlay District standards, to the subject properties upon which the wetland and the surrounding vegetative corridor exist. This is considered a legislative zoning map amendment because it was initiated by the city and involves a decision whether or not to protect a resource through the application of different regulations. And this type of city-initiated policymaking effort is legislative. That said, this action involves the amendment of the city's maps, and it affects only a small number of properties. And in order to avoid any prejudice resulting from the legislative action, the city has complied with the public notice requirements applicable to a quasi-judicial decision as well, which is a type 4 decision. This includes sending public notices to all the affected owners and owners within 300 feet of the properties, and getting input from various groups and committees. And the municipal code chapter that is associated with this map is intended to protect water quality and the functions of streams and wetlands and adjacent habitat by surrounding those features with what's called a vegetative corridor, which results in a buffer between the features and development. And the city does not regulate activities within the wetland itself, the wet area, but the authority to regulate the vegetative corridor is within the city's purview. And as a whole, the Natural Resources Overlay District discourages development within the vegetative corridor, and if there is impact within the vegetative corridor, it requires mitigation for any disturbances that occur. And I just want to give you a little bit of history on how we got to this point. Back in 2016, this wetland was discovered by a prospective developer who conducted a wetland inventory and had that wetland delineation reviewed by the Department of State Lands. This wetland was not indicated on the city's 1999 local wetland inventory. And the way that our code works is we can only regulate wetlands and the vegetative corridors that touch our Natural Resources Overlay District or are within it. In this case, it was not. So the Department of State Lands accepted the wetland delineation, and I only have two slides, this slide and the previous slide. This is the wetland delineation indicating where the boundaries of that wetland inventory was done. It was only done within the properties that were proposed for the cottage home development that the developer was putting forward. Although there was indication on this delineation that the wetland does extend outside the study area, they did not do any inventories or plots outside of that because they didn't have permission to. So. The direction to move forward with this proposal was discussed with the Natural Resources Committee, and the proposal was also taken forward to the Planning Commission and the City Commission, and direction given to staff in 2018 to add this wetland to the city's natural resources overlay district when resources became available. So the reason why it's taken so long is because we were in a long process of code amendments and did not have the staff capacity to take this legislative file up until now. And that's the general history behind this. And in your staff report, I've gone through all of the applicable goals and policies of the comprehensive plan and made a recommendation on a finding for consistency with those comprehensive plan goals and policies that are applicable to natural resources. So the staff recommendation is to include this wetland within the Natural Resources Overlay District. The Planning Commission, you have the purview to change staff's recommendation or reverse staff's recommendation. And if you make that call, we would come back to you with revised findings at a subsequent public hearing. And that's all I have to say. In essence, the question for the Planning Commission is, do you want to recommend adding a 50-foot vegetative corridor to this wetland or not? Or anything in between, really, there. As far as public comments go, we have 3 sets of public comments that are already in your packet, in your electronic packet, but we also have new public comments, 2 comments from Paul Edgar, a letter from the Kenema Neighborhood Association received today from Ken Basinger, Chair, a letter with photographs from James Nasita, and also a letter from Dr. Sandra Lawson. And those are the public comments that we've received so far. And I think we've got 4 public comment cards for people signed up to speak. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions you have. Thank you.
Okay. Questions for Mr. Walter?
I wasn't clear in the packet. So part of this wetland has been built on with the cottage cluster, correct?
That's a good question. So where the wetland itself is indicated and where those street addresses are shown directly with the 4s there, and also 508, those are the addresses assigned to the 5 cottage homes, so it has land use approvals already. And so the imposition of this vegetative corridor does not affect that land use approval, but it could limit the extent to which future owners of those cottages add impervious surface within that vegetative corridor, should they choose to. But most of the site, not including the wetland itself, will have a combination of landscaping, pathways, parking areas, and of course the cottages themselves.
But has the size and shape of the wetland itself been changed as a result of that construction?
Well, the way wetland delineations work is the DSL accepts and concurs with the wetland delineation at the time that it's done, and it may change during a 5-year period. They're usually good for 5 years. So, we know that they are dynamic and they are affected by the groundwater situation, and they may affect over time. So this is the snapshot in time that we would be regulating on. Similar to the city's local wetland inventory, when you look at that, there are wetlands that are not exactly where they are. They've changed. But in most cases, the wetlands that are already known in the local wetland inventory are already touching or within the Natural Resources Overlay District. In this case, this wetland was not.
What I'm asking is, the outline of the wetland is shown on this slide.
Yeah.
Has that been changed because of construction, because of this cottage cluster haven't been, is the cottage cluster constructed? Is it finished?
I think most of the foundations and cottages are underway, yes.
But has that outline changed because of that construction?
No, it has not.
So I got a question. Was any of this under the radar before the cottage home application? Was anybody looking at it before that? And is the reason this whole thing came up because of that development?
Not that I'm aware of, not publicly. I mean, there may have been discussions in it, or, you know, drainage situations that were known about in the neighborhood and that sort of thing. And, you know, that sort of situation is fairly common in Kenema. But we looked pretty exhaustively through all of our public records and the documentation and data sheets that back up the local wetland inventory map and didn't find anything related to this. So part of that is probably due to the fact that it's a very small wetland and it's not connected to anything that we're aware of, even though the Department of State Lands says that it does continue on from the site. And, you know, the reasons for this are, you know, either because we didn't know about it at the time, 1999, or we didn't have permission to inventory the site and go on site because it did require owner consent, or the earlier wetland inventories, like the national wetland inventory that was done, which has preceded the city's 1999 inventory, was the best available data and not very good, frankly. Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Mr. Johnson?
Any more you would like to say about the, there's an email here that you received back and forth, 3 pages of it from
the Department of State Lands?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I added that in because
and the one that caught my attention is the one that's got, they're probably not her full legal or full, she makes some opinions about some stuff. And the main question is does it cover under a half an acre? At one time, the state didn't even look at them if they were under that. And say a few words about that.
Yeah, officially, you know, there's this term in the Oregon Administrative Rules that refers to local significance, and it refers to something called an Oregon Freshwater Wetland Assessment Methodology, and that's a separate type of process that you can apply to a wetland to say whether or not it is significant. In order for it to be significant, it has to meet certain criteria. It has to be viewable, it has to have certain function, it has to provide potential for education, but it also has to have some natural resource function and value. And that process has not been done for this wetland. What's been done is the wetland has been delineated and the edges of it determined, and the soil conditions and plant conditions therein were done. But that additional methodology was not. So there's no requirement to do that either. So, that's just a fact. And the city does have both kinds of wetlands in our inventory, and we do apply vegetative corridors to them.
Okay. Anything else? Nothing else for Pete? Okay. There's no applicant, right? So we go straight to city comments. How do I keep losing him? Okay. So the first, so going to comments, are there any representatives of a recognized neighborhood association, government agency, or other incorporated public interest organization that would like to make a comment? No?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, you're the first comment card, so that works out. Okay, please state your name and city of residence.
Paul Edgar, Oregon City and Kenema.
Well, before you start.
I represent Friends of Kenema.
Just a second, I wanted to add something. Because we have several comments, we wanted to limit them to 5 minutes for a neighborhood association and then 3 minutes for public comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm starting the clock.
Okay, thank you.
Restarting.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
First of all, I would appreciate if you had a chance to take a look at the pictures that Jim Nacita sent in. And one of the things that's important where he's looking, these are the aerial photographs that show the site in 2003, and then it shows the site in 2018. And just prior to the construction or the starting of the construction of the cottage homes. And what you'll see is that the wetland corridor extends all the way down south going, and it's significant. And all of a sudden you see then later on, it's been cut in and filled in. And what historically happened is that there was a pipe that was extended to effectively and illegally without permits that was put in that extended water that goes down to feed or take the water of the stream that comes out of the site. And it carries a significant amount of water, and you'll see in one of the trenches photographed by Karen Blaha in her submittal, kind of a pretty well V-shaped corridor where it was. All of that is now, that is still there, but the part going back, there was a significantly greater for millennia. So this was mentioned in the Kenema Historic Nomination document as being a wetland. And so everyone's known that it's been a wetland, and it's fed right up the hill where you see the cottage homes deal there. Straight uphill is the historic Kenema Waterworks that was put in the 1900s. And it dammed up or took water from the springs up there, put them into these 4 different filtration type tanks. And then, but over the years, when we got annexed, we got city water from Oregon City in 1980 or 1928. Then all of a sudden, there wasn't a need for that water facility. There used to be a building right under where the word home is on the bill, and that was in the 1900s, we show that on the maps, and that was a water distribution site right there. So water now just flows down the hill, and the whole hillside is just one big water area. It's like digging in the sand down at the beach, and you dig down 3 inches and you're in the water all across through the whole area. And it flows down by the house at 208 and down 230. And that trench just logically went straight down through that area, and it was a whole vegetative corridor. It is, then we get into this thing. I hope you had a chance to read it, take a look at it, but this is from Metro, and this is their codes for, they call it the Metro Urban Growth Management Plan, and there's a whole section in there which they talk about why you have to regulate this stuff, and their code mandates that we do these things about restoring these wetlands, protecting these wetlands, and it gets into here where it says they use the code, and I tried to highlight that so that you would be able to see why we have to do this. So it's absolutely consistent that we take and create this wetland boundary of 50 feet around it, but in fact it should be greater. So where you see these lines like the red line where the 508 house is and the 514 house, well, that wetland extends further down there. It was just never delineated by a scientific method. And the site where you see where the 486 address is coming up this way, that's going straight uphill up into where the Kenema Waterworks is. And that area is also just a wetland of water flowing down. And if anyone has any questions about it, then and you wanted a continuation, you could go there and take a look. I'm sure that the people there are not afraid of that. And you can go down and see where the water flows down, then down by the 606 house, and then it flows out through a pipe that goes out into 4th Avenue. All of that piping that was done without city permits, crosses city right-of-ways that have a mandated requirement for a city right-of-way permit to be issued for their existence. So there's a whole lot of stuff, and probably a lot of this wetland just needs to be restored and made correct. It's kind of like a common sense thing. Things were not done as they should have been. And now the question is, should you reward somebody for doing something that's wrong? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Edgar. Okay, next comment, Mrs. Linda Basinger. If you could please state your name and your city of residence for the public record.
Okay, I'm Linda Basinger, and I live in Oregon City. I live in the Kenema area. And this map, I'm so glad it's still up there, because if you actually went and looked at the site today where that's green, you could actually put a pencil mark, and that would be the stream, that would be the wetlands. These are only 5,000 square foot lots to begin with, so they're just, I mean, I don't know who, I mean, they had this great measurement, it's all done scientifically, but if you're looking for the water, it's like a pencil stream that goes through there. This was presented at the Kenema neighborhood meeting in November 2019, and we had about 20 neighbors there and listened to Pete's presentation. And it really wasn't well received there. In fact, the neighborhood took a vote. There were 20 people there, and we took a vote unanimously to vote not to put this in for the wetlands. By taking up 50 feet, that's an entire lot. That's a 5,000 square foot lot to take up. And the neighborhood just could not see this is used as a buffer for the natural resources district. Saw no reason to do this. It makes the property financially unbuildable, and it decreases the value of a vacant lot, where the neighbors on either side have gotten bys or pass. This is only affecting one neighbor because the cottages are built. The other little neighborhood, 502, those buildings are already there. It only affects one person who's lived in her home for over 20 years. This wasn't there when she bought the land, now it's been put in there. And the last time Oregon City updated the wetlands was in 1999. Well, that was real close after 1996. If this had been a flood, I mean, Mr. Edgar says the water flows uphill, it just wouldn't have happened. I mean, this would have been a flood and everyone would have known about it. But this did not flood in 96. It just never has. It's just like a little pencil stream that goes through there. And according to ORS 196.800, Section 17, they give the definitions of wetlands. And the wetlands means those areas that are saturated by surface or groundwater at a frequency and a duration to support that under normal circumstances do support a prevalence of vegetation, typically adapted for the life and saturation soil conditions. This property does not meet any of those descriptions of the wetlands. There's no vegetation, there's no ducks, there's no salmon, there's none of that coming up there. There's no vegetation either that's there from the property either. So I just don't understand why this can't be grandfathered in to all the other neighborhoods or the other properties are that way, or reduced to something that's agreeable. 50 feet, I mean, gosh, that's a 5,000 square foot lot. So that's my question.
Thank you very much. Okay, next comment, Mr. Dennis Anderson. Again, please state your name and city of residence.
Planning Commission, thank you.
You're welcome.
My name is Dennis Anderson. I live at 804 4th Avenue in Kenema. I hope to make this simpler. We have before us two properties effectively involved in this proposal. We have Mr. Staggs and the cottage properties. We have Ms. Blaha at 514 4th Avenue property. We should know at the outset that, or for consideration, that Ms. Blaha has been a good steward of her property for a quarter century, and during all that time, giving care and protection to her backyard, the stream, the Bit Stream, without any disturbance to the water flow or the Kenema habitat. It is evident from the photos that I provided. I have that sent in the packet, which is diagramming the backyard of Mrs. Blaha's property and looks directly across at the cottage project. It deals with the vegetation corridor, and this is the restrictive 50-foot setback that has been interpreted differently by Mr. Staggs. I understand that the Planning Commission, acting as a type 2 quasi-judicial body, can recommend and revise the specification of the overreach of the vegetation corridor. Presently, it's the 50-foot mark. The next thing that I would like to touch on is, which seems to be simple enough, is the request that for 514 property to be treated as the cottage properties, and that any allowances and exceptions that have been given to the cottage property should be made available for Ms. Blaha. Another reason for my trying to assist in this is, without modification to this vegetation corridor, in the current proposal that stands before you, after a lifetime of ownership, maintenance, and care of the wetlands habitat, Ms. Blaha will in effect lose control of half her property. And in effect, it will be taken over and condemned, and as it were, a meadow. More problematic is the legal preferences to this is taking control of half of her 514 4th Avenue property would be considered invasion of personal property. And without mediation or some form of compensation will expose Oregon City to the legal precedent of inverse condemnation. And I don't think that's where we want to go. I don't think anyone wants to buy the property from the city. My remedy, more pragmatic in approach, because there is has been no particular incident, save the building of the cottages, no urgency as to recent flooding or any change in the required habitat of Kenema, would be to give this plan a pause, perhaps even table this proposal to give further consideration on the impact and the hazard that poses to the Ms. Blaha. I would consider this a hardship for her, and as if the 514 4th Avenue property was your personal property, I think you should consider this in a different light and weigh in on how this is impacting Ms. Blaha and her property. Anybody have any questions?
Questions?
Please consult my packet. I have the pictures of the backyard looking across for the thing, and I think you'll know what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Karen Blaha. Again, please state your name and city of residence. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Karen Lytle Blaha, Oregon City. For a quarter of a century, I have been the owner-occupant of 514 4th Avenue in Kenema, the one that you were discussing this evening. My property consists of one legal tax lot of 10,000 square feet. I ask you in your judicial capacity, quasi-judicial, to become the voice of reason in reconciling the letter of the law with what is fair and just. This city's proposal retroactively takes from me the fair use of half of my property. I and my family have been the ones who eradicated the invasive blackberry bushes, hard work, invasive ivy, exhausting work, and planted riparian-friendly species, all that this proposed action asks for. This action targets one property, mine, to remedy its own errors in land use, natural resource identification, and permitting that allowed a very dense housing development adjacent to me. How could a wetlands have been missed when a former city official said it was long known? Please note, I have no problem with the developer, who has been very communicative, and we have a good relationship. I am not placing this on the developer at all. I have some pictures that I don't know if Pete can bring them up. The city granted the adjacent cottage development a grandfathering courtesy. I simply ask for the same grandfathering courtesy. Had the city explicitly informed me in 2016 of its intentions and ramifications to my property versus receiving a shocking notice last September, I could have submitted a plan to accommodate my aging years. Under the current proposal, I could not financially afford to expand my own home or build an ADU so I can age in place. Furthermore, the market value of my home would be negatively affected. There are also two other potential alternatives. The city's installation of piping that would connect to an existing contiguous installation by a neighbor would be equitable. Or reduce the enormous one-size-fits-all state requirement from 5,000 square feet to 1,250 square feet. I vote for grandfathering, but it is you on whom I rely. Depend on your common sense, good conscience, and courage in applying discretion in this matter. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I do thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Want to see
I
pictures?
guess I do have one question. I don't know if it's relevant, but as far as the definition of wetlands, Mr. Edgar, I believe it was, mentioned that in '96 you didn't have any. Did you have standing water? I mean, what does it do
I
during
lived
a
there in
heavy?
'96, and there was no. Sometimes this little waterway is just a ditch, and sometimes it doesn't exist. And sometimes if we have pouring rain, maybe it'll be a foot wide. You know, you can
Gets
just
a little
step
bigger.
over it. You know, it's not a big deal. We have flora and fauna. One of our neighbors, William Foster, sent me a thing of a website of native plantings, and I looked at them, and son of a gun, we have a lot of them in our backyard.
All right.
I have a willow tree, which is supposed to be friendly in this instance.
All right.
We have butterflies, we have bees. This morning in my front yard, we had a woodpecker and a female woodpecker too, so we're expecting babies soon, I think.
All right.
Karen, I just want to point out for the record that Karen did send me some photographs, but I don't have them up on the screen for you, and I will make sure those get into the record for the city commission.
Were those part of the public comment? Because I got that.
They should be, and I neglected to upload them.
It's in the packet, I believe.
Well, no, those are from Dennis.
No, there's some attached to her public comments.
Oh, yeah.
I just want,
Her pictures are in
those-
your comment sections from her.
Oh,
Yeah, we've seen those. Did you see those?
all right. Thank you.
It was part of the public comment?
I don't know if they're the same ones that they might be the same
I don't
ones
know
that I
either.
included.
Okay. All right.
But to show,
Well, I'll make sure.
to show where from my patio, you'll have about I'll have it about 18 to 20 feet. And then the edge of my garage starts, and there starts the boundary to the vegetative corridor.
Right. All right.
And then it goes all the way to the back fence. So it's just about, 5,000 square feet, give or take.
Okay, thank you.
So thanks very much.
You're welcome. Mayor Doug Neely. Please state your name and city of residence.
Doug Neely, Oregon City. I'm a member of the
Natural Resource Committee and the Great Oregon City Watershed Council, and I represent neither of them here. So
All right.
confine me to
Thank
3
you.
minutes.
Thank you for clarifying
I'm not going to
that.
really make much comment on what's before you. I think staff has done a great job in terms of pulling this together. I think the applicants originally had more homes cited for this cottage home area, as I recall, and then the inventory was done. So I'm going to talk beyond this particular development in the area that's uphill of it. This is a problem you run into where you have these lots and there's no inventory already done. Applicants come in and then you do a fix afterwards, is what's happened here at the cottage homes. Somehow I feel the city has to identify funding to complete this inventory for this wetland that's up above here. That way the property owners will know what constraints they're under before they, I don't think there are homes there, before they choose to develop that area. Some of it can't be developed because of slopes and so forth. But this piecemeal approach to gain a handle on these things that were missed in the original inventory has to be dealt with in a more comprehensive way. And then the property owners know what they can or potentially cannot do when they make applications to develop their property. It's the only comment I have to make. And I do want to compliment staff on the tremendous work that they've done on this piece.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Okay. Last comment, Mr. Ken Basinger. Thank you. Please state your name and city of residence.
Hi.
Hello.
Ken Basinger, Oregon City, lived in Kenema for about 20 years now. Chair of the Kenema Neighborhood Association. Staff pointed out at the beginning of this discussion that you have the option of including the 50-foot vegetated corridor as part of the process here. And what we voted on as a neighborhood association and agreed to by a vote of 19-1, I believe, might have been 18-2 in our September meeting, was what is reflected in the letter that I gave you. And that is that we would prefer to not see the vegetated corridor extend onto Karen Blaha's property for the reasons that she and others have stated. And that's what I wanted to make sure you understood.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Is that it for public comments?
That's it for public comments unless
That's your public comments. All right, so as a legislative issue, does it work any different? Do we close the public comments and start discussions?
Yes, you close the public comments, public hearing portion and start deliberating.
We'll close the hearing for public comments and start discussing this. Where do we begin? This is an incredibly difficult situation for some people.
I've got some ways I would go, but for the commission, I would, before I go into any individual topic, I would ask the city attorney for a little advice on a couple of options. And I'll give you the range of options that I think you may have. Grandfather it, reduce the buffer size. Both could be acceptable. I don't know. I haven't talked to the rest of the third one is install a culvert or connect to a culvert that's already there that's illegal. I don't know if I'd touch that one. Or, in all honesty, the fourth one, third in this case, if you delete number 3, would be, we could approve the proposal as presented.
Right.
Sure, and let me talk about a few different things, and you know, hopefully we'll get around to answering your questions. And in terms of grandfathering, I'm still not completely certain what that means. I think what that means is that whatever develop, even though there's a buffer would be imposed over land, that you would still have the right to do as if that buffer weren't there. In my mind, that would essentially be the better way to do it is to just not put the buffer on the property, would essentially have the same effect and be cleaner. You have the ability to do that, as the staff report says. In terms of, and now I've gone down a bit of a tangent, and could I ask you to restate the question, Jude?
Sure. I think your answer to the grandfather, you know, if we try to put some particulars around that, my thoughts would have been they get the same grandfather provisions that the cottage home sites have, would kind of be.
And it would be hard to articulate in the way that would make sense. I really think the better course in that situation would be just not to impose the buffer. It just is simpler record keeping wise, and from somebody looking at a map at what's happening. And
so you're picking what I call number 2, reduce the buffer size.
Our recommendation is to apply the 50-foot buffer.
Yeah.
So for the reduction of the buffers, you can make whatever you want as far as the overlay district. So when development happens within the overlay district, they have to figure out if there are any features in there. And if you find a feature, the buffer could get bigger, right? So the purpose of this 50-foot buffer is to have native vegetation around the wetland on the property on the screen, not Mrs. Blaha's wetland or stream or whatever it is. We don't have any data to know what that is. It just happens to fall within the buffer of this one. So if she finds something there, it could make it bigger around other right-of-way or on site. The 50-foot buffer comes from our code for the vegetated corridor width on wetlands. Generally, when we did map all the wetlands, though, we actually did a 60-foot buffer because we added 10-foot just for mapping error sake. But you can do whatever distance you want to do. Just know if you find something and it's touching the overlay, it will expand out further.
So of the two options, I guess I don't want to just put some words out there and give the applicant a belief that, boy, I'm really getting some relief, but if it doesn't help her in developing it, or what does she get from, if we deny this, what position does that put her in, and what position does it put the city in? Is it legal battles coming up ahead of that, or is it pretty sound ground just to reduce the buffer size then?
Yeah. You know, my thought would be not to worry about legal battles coming up. I mean, what will happen is eventually at some point in the future, the only thing that this impacts is, you know, potentially the sale of the property, some reduction in property value, if in fact there's this, you know, buffer zone on the back of it. Don't know how much. Some people may see it as amenity. More important is, what does that mean when eventual development happens? It may never develop, and there may never be, you know, something that occurs. But if in fact the owner, whether it's Ms. Blaha or somebody in the future, comes in for development, do you want to talk about what it means if that's on there as opposed to what it doesn't?
I can talk to that a little bit. In the staff report, we talk about the effect of having the majority of your lot covered by the overlay. And what that is defined as in the code is called a highly constrained lot of record, and it allows for a maximum disturbance area of up to as much as 3,000 square feet of impervious surface area. What I said in the staff report was that amount, you know, actually exceeds what your 40% lot coverage allowance is for buildings. But at the same time, if you've got this on your property, you have to hire a wetland specialist to actually delineate whatever the feature is when you develop, and then do a type 2 land use application to analyze the impacts of any future development and plantings and that sort of thing. So those are that's the process that would be applied when a development, or if a development is proposed.
Okay, so with that said, did the cottage homes have to go through that?
No.
Because it wasn't there?
No, because the way the code works is if you find a wetland in the course of development that is not touching or within the natural resource overlay district, the city's regulations don't apply, but the state regulations may. So they would continue, the Department of State Lands would continue to regulate any wetlands of significance, and maybe the Corps of Engineers, so.
Okay. But it was I wasn't here back when this all started.
Right, so.
But when the cottage homes development happened, that kind of put the whole area in the spotlight because no one was even looking at it before that.
Right.
So, if it wasn't for the cottage homes, it wouldn't be here, possibly.
Very likely.
But now we are, and now we have this in front of us.
So the only property this is affecting is hers, then, right?
Judging
as far
by
as-
the extent of that vegetation.
I mean, the whole area, but it's
It
already
affects part of the
there.
city right away as well, so. A small
And portions of 502 as well.
Yeah,
Just to be clear, whether there is whether the overlay district touches her property or not, if there is a feature found anywhere in the city, then they would have to delineate it and go through DSL review, just like what happened
Right.
on this one too. If you stop the buffer if you cut it off right where her property line is, she still would get pulled into the overlay district, because if she found a feature that touches the overlay district, it applies.
yeah.
No matter what, if this gets put into the overlay district, even if we keep her property out of it, just the fact that the cottage homes is in it, it's still, because it's touching it.
If it touches it, it applies.
Okay. Or two
For
options.
wetlands, yeah.
Right, okay, so our options are, doesn't sound like the grandfathering in is a good option. We can either, and our vote is, it still needs to go to city commission, so we can only recommend this. We can either recommend it or not recommend it. Those are our two options. Well, plus add some conditions of approval or.
Right. Yeah,
Oh, yeah. Any thoughts? How do you feel about this one?
I just want to clarify that, Chair Schlangenhofer. Can the
Yes.
Planning Commission recommend conditions of approval on a legislative file?
What can we do precisely?
So it is possible to condition a legislative file. The question is, what condition are you talking about? And that's, really
Shrink it, keep the property out of it.
Well, in that case, I wouldn't say so much a condition, like let's say you wanted to shrink it, just say we recommend that the wetland buffer zone not include an area and 514 or something. So it's not really a condition, it would just the recommendation would change.
And
Commissioner Gage?
if you make a recommendation, we would
I
encourage
like
you
what
to
you just
explain.
There, the last part. To have it not have that buffer on our property. If there's a way to.
Well, it sounded like we're not big fans of that. So, Ms. Turway, what are our options for keeping her property out of it? Besides just saying no to the whole buffer zone.
You could propose that the overlay district go to the property line, but not extend over 514, or that it stop short of the property line. I would just encourage you to talk a lot about why, because we'll have to tell the city commission why.
Right, it needs to make legal sense.
I mean, it's legislative, it's a policy, so you have a little bit of leeway there.
Could,
Right.
if we're talking about the buffer zone, reducing the size, can we reduce it and use a foot number?
Yeah.
25 feet from the wetlands is still, will have some restrictions, but that would free up the property here that we're the subject to today, 514. It wouldn't be touching, it'd be back 20, 30 feet from.
Yeah, you can do any number that you want. What I hear you guys saying is that you don't want the overlay district to apply on 514. So you can just, it'd be cleaner to make a recommendation that it not apply on 514. Whether you want it to apply really close to the line or not is up to you. But 50 foot is the buffer in our code. If you reduce it, it reduces it all the way around.
Yeah. The difficult part I have on this is that before this all happened, it wouldn't have been an issue. But now she's got Mrs.
Blaha.
Mrs. Blaha. She had a nice view in her backyard, and now she's got all these cottage homes to look at that are maybe 6 feet from her fence. And then we're telling her at the same time, you can't do anything like that. So it just doesn't seem.
It doesn't seem right.
It doesn't seem right. That's, and that's just my personal opinion. If we can make that work into a legislative way.
Right.
Or just veto the whole thing. I mean, that's kind of.
It's
my
a
opinion.
recommendation of the city commission. So you can recommend that it get vetoed, but
I can, I could recommend that. That's how I feel about it.
What if we recommend that it only applies within the cottage property lines?
Which does that even make sense since he's already developed it? And
Well, it would prevent.
it doesn't sound like it really fits the definition of a wetland anyway. Nobody's said they've seen a lake back there.
We probably don't want to try to tackle the wetlands.
Right, we're not
but I
qualified to decide if it's a wetland or not. I'm not a geologist or
Now,
hydrologist.
Mrs. Blaha, we know her intents, kind of what she wants with that. It may not be that she's as concerned about the development as it is of, it's her own backyard that she's used for 25, 26 years. And if we cut the buffer in half, let's say 25 foot, she's still going to have the infringement on part of her backyard. It's clear that it's no longer touches this for development, but which is the real desire.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to, prevent her from being able to build a garden shed. I mean, something like that could technically do something
Maybe
like
she
that.
wants to keep it like it is for her
She very well
backyard.
may want to.
And if things work out, it could become a way to build on the back, still build on the
in
back
the
half,
future,
which
maybe
meets
even,
some of Pete's criteria of 40% or.
Right. There are, various exemptions within the Natural Resource Overlay District as well. So maintenance of existing structures and that sort of thing. You can keep your gardens and that sort of thing. Just.
So
Yeah, but my recollection of the Natural Resource Overlay District restrictions when I researched it when I bought my house was no accessory buildings, no new lawns, no new gardens, no swimming pools, no water tanks. There's a long list of other things that I'm missing, but I mean that's essentially what we're doing to the back of 514. No new gardens, no raised beds, nothing.
Well, I don't know if that's exactly right. The way I interpret the regulations today, they are, we allow for, the biggest thing is new impervious surface.
Right.
Like paving and structure.
I'm fairly certain that it includes lawns and gardens.
you're true. I think what Pete's trying to clarify is that it's not no new lawns, it's you have to mitigate if we see lawn as a disturbance. And so it's supposed to be lush native vegetation for the health of critters and shade for the water feature. And so if you want to do something other than that, whether it's a building and we're seeing lawns, like grass is not the lush native vegetation, that you have to mitigate for that. So that there is an avenue and process to do some of those things. It's not as clear as yes or no.
But it requires a hydrologist or some $10,000 or $20,000.
It's expensive, and it takes some process.
That's not
For sure.
Okay.
So,
So what can we propose? We're gonna need some staff guidance on what exactly can we propose that kind of preserves her property rights the way she's had them for the last quarter decade.
Depends what you want to do. Where if she has lawn here now, that could obviously stay, and if that's what you mean by grandfathering, then you could still apply the buffer and she could continue to do what she's ever doing today forever. If you're looking at not applying the buffer so that she can put buildings and stuff back there more easily, then it sounds like you're requesting to take the existing buffer and modify it in some way. And specifically, it sounds like your recommendation is to either not apply the buffer to 514 or only apply the buffer to 514 for up to 25 feet on a property or something like that.
Well, something where it allows her an ADU potential, down the road. What would that take?
I mean,
I don't think she wants an ADU, but just to give her.
But she may want to resell it sometime and have that
definitely
as
affects her property
right,
value.
you bet it does.
well,
Yeah.
well, ADUs are a little tricky because then you're talking about an actual building and there's a big lot and you could put a building in lots of places or in the same structure as well.
And it would, it'd take a massive addition to even get back there.
Right.
I understand that.
I'm interpreting that to mean you would prefer that she have the ability to build in her backyard without doing all the studies. And so that means
Like her neighbor.
no overlay. However, if she finds a wetland, she will still have to do a study and delineate the wetland itself.
Remember, her neighbor did the study, which is why we're here tonight.
So
Cottage homes?
Yeah.
yeah,
Staggs?
they also had no overlay, found a wetland, then had to pay all the money to delineate it. So I would suspect that the wetland does go onto 514, and
Okay.
if she does build back there and finds that there is a wetland, she will still have to do the study.
Okay.
You just won't
So-
get that buffer applied, right?
Now, does that apply
Right.
only to like a home or an ADU? What if she wanted to build a garden shed or somebody else bought it and wanted to put a shed back there? Is that still the wetland issue? it still
It's
come up?
regulated by the Department of State Lands, so they have thresholds for what size.
Okay.
500 square feet.
Okay, so it sounds like regardless, the wetland is gonna be an issue for her. Depending, that doesn't even depend on what we do here, but the buffer is the biggest issue.
Yes, you have control over the buffer, but not the wetland.
Okay.
if we don't know for sure what the petitioner is asking for,
Right, well, nothing right now.
I don't know the process or procedure from this point forward for the next 10 minutes. Can we open a record, bring the applicant back up and ask, or that may be putting pressure on her that she's not ready to answer today? Or do we go to the longer term answer of continuance, let her, let's hash some of this out and
There's no.
get an answer back from her some way or another.
More questions?
So you do have the opportunity to reopen the record, reopen the public hearing if you want, and limit it to, the person that you want to hear input from and close it. You don't have to open it up to everybody. And so
Yeah,
that's
it wouldn't be
something
bad
you're
to ask
interested
her,
in.
her opinion on.
You agreeable to that, or is?
Absolutely.
And I guess it's her option. We can ask her, but she's can come forward, or she may say, hey, I'd rather do it in 2 weeks.
Sure, yeah, let's bring her back up. What was her first name?
Ms. Blaha.
Okay, so let's reopen the public comment part of the hearing. And would Karen Blaha care to come back up?
Can I make a statement too?
No, we're just gonna ask Karen.
Please call me Karen. It's much easier.
All right, thank you. Please state your name and city of
It's
residence.
Karen Lytle Blaha, Oregon City, a resident of Kanema at 514, the property under discussion.
Okay, all right. So Commissioner Johnson, your concerns with her plans for the
we
property.
can sit here and make some assumptions that
Right.
you want to develop it, or you may not want to develop it.
That is not developing in terms of doing another kind of, it's one lot.
One lot.
And I know that there was a statement in the staff report that said it had been back in the day 2 lots that were combined, and so technically it could be divided into 2 lots, but that would require a whole process.
Yeah, it's a process that you
And
may
that
not
is,
want to go
and I'm
through.
not going to do that. I have no intention of doing that. The only thing that had been in my head as I age is building out, adding to the house a little bit to have just an extension where I could have, you know, something that's compatible for an aging person to live in. And then we have my daughter, my family
A caregiver
with me.
live in it, or
A caregiver, my family, or whoever, and something that would be suitable for family living also. You know, these homes are small. They're not the old,
No,
you know,
right.
But
the
they're
historic homes are
they're
not.
warm and dry though in the wintertime, right? Inside?
Well, maybe yours
Mostly dry.
is. I don't know about mine. Because you have to have special windows also. So I didn't have any grand building plan.
Okay.
I know that someone in the city that I talked to said, well, you know, it's about letting the water flow. And well, we haven't had a lot of water. It's more like a trickle, and you can just step across it when there's any trickle at all. And so just taking me out of the buffer would just continue the whatever's flowing to flow.
Okay.
I mean, the one side has, you know, has mitigated, you know, disturbed the property, let's say, and the other side has a pipe. And we've been the ones who have been keeping it natural, and with native species and all of that, we've been such good caretakers. It kind of feels a little bit punishing to be have this legal cloud put over me.
Right. Okay, so let me ask you a question. So regardless of if the buffer was gone, you're still going to have issues with the wetland as far as being able to build something near a wetland. That's always going to be an issue.
Well, I had
regardless of what
never.
we decide on. But the buffer, would that be a good compromise? If the buffer was gone, you still have the issues with the wetland, no matter what. But would that kind of satisfy what you're hoping for?
Yeah, we don't have a wetland, though. We're not part of the net of the wetland. This is just
But
a
it sounds like
vegetated
being near it, you're
corridor.
going to have issues with that, and there's nothing really we can do about that. But
And not having the buffer would solve a lot of problems.
okay. All right.
And if you were to, if
Because there's only
anybody,
certain things we can do here, and here we can discuss the buffer. We can't really discuss the wetland.
right.
But we can discuss
and
the buffer.
It's the buffer that's the problem.
Right.
It imposes many onerous,
Understood.
yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for her?
And your desire, I think, is not for a major building expansion.
No, you're right.
I don't know about an ADU, but if you set that detached from the house.
I guess, I don't know, that's the new trendy thing they talk about, and I would prefer just an extension that accommodates,
Small
you
addition
know,
to
it'd
your
be small, it wouldn't be very large.
And keep control, I'll call the word, but you still have your backyard that you can walk
Correct.
around in and
Correct.
dig a little here and plant a shrub or a tree here
Yeah.
and grass and all that.
Right, and can you have a dog in a wetland? I mean, a buffer. Can our dog go down and dig? I don't know. I'm afraid, I know, Pete's laughing, but these are the things that keep me up at night. And so as vegetation grows up, I mean, do you get mice and what are those nutria things trying to go? I mean, I'm worried about that. And, you know, we have mice in general anyway because it's a whole wooded area. And so there are a whole host of questions that have arisen. Can we mow the grass?
Yeah, you want to go use your backyard for what everybody else uses the backyard. One day you want to sit out there in a chair, and the next day you want to.
Quick question for you.
Sure.
So the current proposed buffer is 50 feet, right? It's width of your lot. If it was reduced to 25 feet, so an arc of roughly this size, would that allow you room?
That doesn't, and it would go, the way it would go is across.
Well, so it's a 25-foot radius, my understanding, from the wetland.
It's 20, well, you could go ahead, but I could tell you what I
50,
mean.
right?
If you went 25 feet, it would be from the edge of
the
what's
green.
delineated.
Edge of the
Right, so if we
stream.
reduced it from 50 feet to 25, it would be roughly this area here. Is that
I don't think so. I think it's from the edge of the stream.
This is a question that he can factually answer for us.
Yeah, I mean, today, if you make that decision, that would be the extent of it.
So, question for you, if the buffer was only this portion here, would that still allow you room to build, to add on?
Not really. Pete had told me that if I did anything that even touched the buffer boundary, then the permitting and the fees just rain on me. So it makes it financially impossible.
So what I'm asking is, if we reduce that from 50 feet to 25, I'm just using kind of round numbers, if this is a 50 by 200 lot. So it would be, the buffer would be roughly 40 feet from your house then?
I think this is.
My lot's, the lot, it's about half.
50 foot wide by 100 foot.
Yeah, right.
It's 50 across.
Well, it's 50 by 200, so it's 50 across, that's roughly 4 times. Right. So what I'm asking is, if the buffer was reduced to where it was only 45 feet from your house, would 45 feet be enough room for you to add on the ADU?
No, I would, I could accept a 12 and a half, because the way I see it, it's on either edge of the little drizzle that comes through.
Right.
It's kind of like a ditch. I regret that folks haven't come over to see it.
So it's not related, but I understand it. It's not related to your ditch, it's related to the edge of that green area. So it's a radius from the edge of that green area, correct?
Right, because a development proposal would there's two things that would have to happen for Karen to be regulated. First, you would have to impose a buffer. And then if she proposes a development, she would have to delineate the feature on the property if it exists. And then it could change where the buffer is. Because we only,
Okay, so question for Mr. Walter. How close can you build to a buffer? Up to it?
25 feet on a 50-foot is the,
So you can't give
as
it
a type
25
2, if
feet
you
up
want to
to
go
50.
closer than 25 feet, you got to go to the planning commission.
Within 25 feet.
Hold on.
We don't buy
I think you're asking if you have like a buffer on your property, if you build outside the buffer, is that okay? Yes, the NROD isn't triggered until you build in the buffer. He was talking about
But
distances.
it's 25 feet away from that as your setback from the.
No, you're either out of the bubble or you're in the bubble.
Okay, so you can build up to the bubble? Within an inch? Okay, all right.
But you can't touch it.
You can't touch it?
Are you
Without
saying
further review.
Without further review.
if the buffer is 5 foot from the edge of her property line, she's probably pretty well off to do anything in the backyard she wants to. She may not be able to build a big house back there that doesn't meet the setbacks. What's the setback she would have?
We're also in a historic district, so I want to avoid getting into the design stuff piece of it. But so if you were to apply the wetland as shown on the screen, or the natural resource overlay district as shown in the bigger bubble on the screen, you could see that there's room, if she wanted to do like a rear addition that's modest size, she would be able to do that and stay outside the buffer and wouldn't have to go through the natural resource overlay district review. She would just go through what we would call an exception, where she shows she's not building in the buffer. And so you can do whatever you want outside the buffer, although realize that there's other overlay districts and historic districts that apply. But the overlay districts only get
triggered for the bigger review when you're building in it. And if they do get triggered, then you're either delineating the feature or you're building in it and then mitigating it with plants or making the feature or the buffer bigger somewhere else. So, is that helpful?
I like the city attorney's take on this, that, you know, the grandfathering, just grandfather it in as if it never existed, the buffer issue, and just leave things as they are, and we'll continue to be good stewards as we always were. And I would be, most people in Kadima are very good stewards of their properties. And frankly, I feel targeted. I am one widow, I am one property, one person, retired. This just doesn't seem fair and just to me. It feels very ungood.
All right, any more questions for Mrs. Blaha?
And can I just say one thing about Pete? He's been so kind helping me. I know that staff are restricted in what they can do. They have to go by the letter of the law. You know, it's black and white. But it is you folks who have discretion and have all, you know, the hard decision making. And I appreciate it. I appreciate the problems that I'm bringing to you are not easily, you know, solved. But I am relying on your good conscience to see what's right. And thank you.
We appreciate that. All right, so we're ready to reclose the public record? Okay, we'll reclose the public record. Let's talk about it some more.
Addie, you always got good advice for us.
I
Jump out
frankly
there.
would like for us to grandfather her lot 514 so that it is not part of the vegetative corridor.
Is that a legal option?
So I guess grandfathering is just it's difficult to understand that. I think what I'm hearing you say is that it's, you know, there's no vegetated corridor on 514. What I think I hear you saying is that you would recommend that the city commission adopt the NROD overlay zone such that the buffer is not included on the property 514.
Correct. Yes.
So, you know, essentially it would end right at the red line on that map.
So could we make a motion based on what you just said?
Yeah, can I understand, just because it's our job to communicate to the city commission, so I wanted to go over the rationale for why, just because I'm sure they will ask.
Yes,
So
it makes sense.
have a list and tell me if I'm right or wrong. So it sounds like the concern from the planning commission was that the impact is a large percentage of the property at 514. There's a limited number of property owners that are affected, and this one is affected to a high degree.
Right.
You're concerned about allowing future development at 514 in the back. And I heard something about it being unfair relative to development that was allowed on neighboring property, and a concern for reduction in property value. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that we can add? Or
Property rights issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you
property rights, what do you want me to say about that? Or
No, I think two of your comments kind of related to her property rights, property value, future development. So that's kind of the part where that's kind of my feeling on it, and I think you've covered it well.
All right, so it sounds like your motion is to approve what LEG 1906 with the condition, with the condition to exclude 514.
Yeah.
Yes.
Recommend approval of Leg 19. So what I would recommend as a motion is approve Leg 19-06, showing the delineated wetlands and overlay, except that the overlay would not include any portion of 514 4th Avenue.
So moved.
Yes.
We have a second?
Second.
Okay. We have a vote?
Commissioner Staggs? Oops, sorry. Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Schlangenhofer,
Aye.
Commissioner Gage,
Aye.
Commissioner Stoll.
Aye.
Motion passes. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Anybody care to take a 5-minute break, or do you want to push on? Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break?
Okay, yeah.
5-minute break?
Back at, what is it, 9:08?
File.
Okay.
Excellent. Oh,
Okay, we're running again.
well, hold on, we're still.
We're waiting for Commissioner Johnson.
Oh. The mics are on.
Okay.
Okay.
So while the mics are on and we're waiting for Commissioner Johnson, the city commission meeting to hear the addition of the Kenema wetlands will be, when are we saying?
March 4th.
March 4th, okay. So that's a Wednesday, 7 PM at City Commission Chambers, March 4th.
Okay, Commissioner Johnson has returned. Welcome back. Moving on to agenda item 3D, LEG 19-00003, Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan, Code and Zoning Amendments, Planning Commission recommendation, and discussion of outstanding item, the collector street width. Staff report?
Thank you. Planning Commissioners,
Thank you.
I have a couple of slides just to go over this outstanding item and kind of give some next steps for the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan. At the last Planning Commission meeting where this was discussed, Chair Mitchell did bring up a concern about the width of the adopted bike lanes and directed staff to do some research and come back with any recommendations. And so while we went away and did some work, and I'm back this evening to kind of provide the information we found and look for specific recommendation from the Planning Commission. The Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan adopted cross sections, but what they didn't adopt, they adopted the full recommended right-of-way. In this case, for Collector Green Street, it's 86 feet, but each particular element is not identified. But if you kind of do the math and you realize the standard widths for the cross sections, you quickly come up to the understanding that the bike lane is in 2008 was a recommended 5-foot wide bike lane. So since 2008, their industry standards for bike lane widths have changed, and they're more recommended to be either 8 feet with basically a 5-foot wide bike lane and a 3-foot shy space, or if you have a separated bike lane, you have a 1.5 foot kind of door clearance area, the 5-foot bike lane, and the 3-foot separation. So talking with Public Works, they're not in a place to recommend a preferred option right now. There's a lot more work they need to do. There's some maintenance questions. There's some discussions about citywide. So our goal is to look for recommendations that can include either version. Either you have either the 8 or the 9.5 feet. Some options have parking on one side. That'd be more of the 8-foot option. If you have parking and then the bike lane, that's where you have more of the 1.5 foot on one side, and then the 3-foot shy on the other. That's where you get to the 9.5 feet. These are for collector streets, and the adopted collector streets as part of the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan are what you see in the blue. These are things like Loader Road, Myers Road, Glen Oak Road, and then the kind of to be determined name road at the very south as it intersects with Timber Sky. The other two north-south streets are those two north-south parallel, kind of the East Ridge, which is on the far east that touches the conservation open space, and then kind of the north-south collector, which would then hook up, which was called the kind of center parkway in the plan, or more like it would hook up to the extension of Holly Lane. So these streets don't have names yet, but that's kind of what they were described in the plan. You'll notice there's a lot of blue collector streets. What we don't know is at the time of development if the traffic studies will bear out that they all will meet collector street traffic volumes. So sometimes in a development application, especially in this area in the farther southeast, so the farther south and the farther east you get in this concept plan, the traffic volumes may not warrant a collector street because there just won't be as much traffic. But we don't know that today during these concept plan amendments because we don't have that level of transportation analysis because we don't quite know what the development is. So what we're looking at is a street design for collector streets. What we don't know is if every single one of these blue streets identified will remain collector streets when development comes in. But we need to know what a collector street will look like and what the right-of-way width will be. So staff did some outreach in this last month, presented to the Transportation Advisory Committee on their February 18th meeting. We didn't get down to the specific right-of-width direction, which we're coming to you this evening, but we did ask their recommendation generally about wider bike lanes. And they did support wider and safer bike lanes, and definitely a section of them really liked protected bike lanes. And that was where there's more of a vertical element, either a car or a vertical piece of an element that separates the bike. But that was just a general comment. But they did vote to recommend that the city pursue a change from a 5-foot bike lane to a wider bike lane in the revised concept plan zoning and code amendments. So staff went and created a survey looking at kind of prioritizing right-of-way elements. You know, if you know we need extra right-of-way for safer bike lanes, are you looking at adding to the existing right-of-way, taking away some existing elements such as the internal median or wider planter strips, or kind of a combination of both, or do nothing and stay with the existing 5 feet? So this was shared on our social media page, as well as our e-blast list, which has about 185 members right now that are interested in the Beaver Creek Road concept plan. So we have survey results on your dais as well, and those will emailed to you at 5. Just want to remind everybody, this is not a scientific survey. But it's a lot of people who responded are very interested in the Beaver Creek Road concept plan. Like a lot of our surveys, all opinions have been represented. And so we also pasted everybody's individual comments. So those aren't on the screen tonight, but in your packet, you'll see kind of the raw comments, both for the 2 questions that were asked, which is what factors led to your decision, and do you have anything additional to add? So those are available as kind of raw comments. But you have a fair amount of people who agreed that the 5-foot bike lane should be expanded, but it's really kind of broken up between the different options of just add the additional lane to the right-of-way, kind of a combination of reduction and additional, and don't expand the right-of-way at all and find all your savings by reducing the median or the planter strips on the side. The kind of what I'm asking this evening of the Planning Commission, and we can go back to the questions here, really kind of general direction. Which of these 4 options would you like to direct staff to pursue? And I will work with our Public Works Department based on your general direction, what the resulting right-of-way will be, because I wanted their expertise on making sure that we're either adding or subtracting based on what makes sense for the Public Works Department. That revised right-of-way will be added to the findings that will come back to you at the February 24th meeting. At the February 24th meeting, there'll be a full staff report and findings, red line zoning code, the comprehensive plan map, the zoning map, and then exhibits of the amendments to the concept plan based on what was discussed in the staff memos over the time. So for example, Planning Commission recommends removing the requirement for master planning as one of the requirements. That will need to be the master plan will actually have to, the concept plan will have to be amended. So we'll provide those recommended revisions to the concept plan as an exhibit. So that kind of full package will be brought back to the Planning Commission at the February 24th meeting. The Planning Commission will review it, provide any additional findings or revisions, and make a recommendation to the City Commission. Right now, we are tentatively scheduled for the March work session. And I know Chair Mitchell will be attending and to make a presentation to the City Commission about the work that the Planning Commission has done this fall and winter. And then we hope to start City Commission hearing soon after. The one last issue that was potentially brought up by Chair Mitchell, and these actually are 2 items I want to enter in the record, both the exhibits and an email from Mike Mitchell that asked about upland habitat protection. And as discussed at one of the previous meetings, we received direction from the Planning Commission about if staff should provide additional code language to further regulate upland habitat identified in the concept plan, and staff did not receive additional direction, but it's unclear if there was an anticipation that the Natural Resource Committee would come back. Their meeting in February was canceled, so there's no planned presentation. I do know that the chair is looking at potentially sending a personal email not speaking for the committee, but on herself, providing some more scientific background, and I'll add that into the record. But right now, there is not an additional presentation planned for the Natural Resource Committee on this item, unless further direction is given by the Planning Commission on this. So this evening, I'm really looking for direction on the survey for the collector width, and based on that, I'll go back to our Public Works Department and see what the optimal right-of-way description will be, and that will be narratively amended in the concept plan.
On option number 3, it says also increasing the street width. Do you mean the right-of-way width?
Yeah, right-of-way width. I think it's kind of, that's the one that planning staff recommends is, right now you can take, there's 7.5 foot wide planter strips on the edges. On residential streets, it's normally 5 foot, but because it's a collector street, there's a little bit wider. But in most of our collector streets, we also don't have medians. So we kind of have wider planter strips in Oregon City collectors. But now we have wider planter strips and this median in the middle. So staff is looking at, really, do you take out, maybe you get 5 foot out of 2.5 feet on either side to reduce the planter strips to 5 feet, and maybe either able to take out 1 or 2 feet from the medians or not. Maybe you have to then add to the right of way. So it's kind of a combination of maybe reducing the width of the median a little bit, reducing the edge planter strip, and maybe adding 1 or 2 feet to get to that 8 to 9.5 feet bike lane.
What kind of speed limits are we talking about on these streets?
So residential streets, right now we're looking at that 20 mile per hour. It is still a little unclear. I've been working with Public Works if residential collectors can be at 20. I know non-residential collectors cannot. So the question is, if you go back to, and I don't have the answer yet, it's a little unclear what the legislation allowed. Arterials are not allowed to go 20 feet, and non-residential streets are not allowed to go 20 miles per hour. But residential collectors, so kind of that southern end, I don't know if that's something that meets the Senate bill. It's a little unclear, but I think definitely what meets the Senate bill are local streets to 20 miles per hour, as well as the Glen Oak Road 2-block Main Street.
If it was a non-residential collector, what would it be, 25?
25 or 30.
25 or 30.
Okay, I got a question. I'm just trying to, get the right picture in my head. Myers Road, is that a residential collector? Because there's some driveways coming off of it, some of the older driveways, or is that
existing Myers Road, or
kind of near the Pioneer Ridge Apartments? What would you classify that type of road as?
I can check. I believe that's an arterial.
It's an arterial. Mm-hmm. Okay, because arterials can also have driveways.
Not really. They may be existing driveways.
Yeah, like old driveways back when it was a country road.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, those are just.
But as far as a new road, a residential collector would have driveways.
Residential collectors most likely would not have driveways. Would be discouraged unless there was no way you could find.
Okay,
yeah, residential collectors would not have it.
All right.
Now, if the area in the southeast portion was found not to warrant traffic for a collector, it would be downgraded to a local street, which then would have the ability to put driveways on it.
Okay.
Would the right-of-way width be changed?
Yeah, it would change to a local street standard.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Can we go back to the cross-section?
Sure.
For a second?
And this is the cross-section as adopted in 2008.
And this would go through multiple different land use zones.
Yeah, the collector Green Street would be for residential and commercial. So it would also go up to the northern portion as north of Loader Road. where you have that campus industrial. Right now, there is not a differentiation between residential collector and commercial collector in the adopted plan.
Okay, so that's a 86-foot right-of-way. The bike lane designs that would need more right-of-way width, how much more do those require?
They require either 3 or 4.5 feet on either side.
On both sides? Okay. What is the negative to building a right-of-way too wide?
Well,
There's more room, there's more room to fit
there's room.
things.
I think it's always you're looking at balance. A much wider street, even though you have the median in the middle, does have the wider your street is, the more you lose a neighborhood feel. Even though
3 feet's not that bad.
No, it's not.
That
I think
sounds
it's one of those questions of a wider road, your buildings are farther apart.
Yep.
You lose a neighborhood feel, which may not be as important on the northern end where you might have campus industrial, but that may be more of an issue related to more residential development. People wanted a sense of community in this area, and so being cognizant that wider roads can potentially affect that. So I don't have a specific answer for the planning commission other than I recommended probably something in the middle, knowing that we are balancing those competing interests.
One thing to add to that too is we just want to recognize that we are changing the goalpost for those property owners who expected this much right of way. Now they're getting a little bit, or the city is taking a little bit more.
And we tried not, we were in this whole process of amending the zoning code. We really were amending what was adopted, and it was only in times through this process where we identified conflicts. And so this is a conflict where we identified our desires for bike design and bike lane design has changed in the last 16 years. And so here's this conflict, and how does the planning commission want to approach that?
Okay. Okay, so that's not the only thing
that's all I'm asking
giving
for
you
this
guidance
evening.
on is which one to propose.
And I'll go back to the
options.
where was I? No. There we go.
Yeah.
There.
So I've got another question. Is there a differentiation between the size of the collector road and its associated right-of-way, depending on what land use zoning it's traveling through at this point?
Not at this point.
Has that been a consideration? Because, if you're going through like an area where you have 4-story buildings on each side of the street compared to a residential neighborhood where there's just a single-story house, that's a much different kind of condition.
So this is the balance we're working on this year is how to implement the plan as adopted, identify when there's conflicts. And so the plan didn't really differentiate like a kind of a north or south version of the collector street for commercial versus residential. That is something the planning commission can look at, or the city commission can look at, but I need direction from the planning commission and city commission on that.
Yeah.
I'd like to see a differentiation
Yeah,
of it. I mean,
if you have a mixed-use commercial zone what is the height limit going to be in that world?
I'd have to look, but it's campus industrial is about 45 feet, if I can remember. I'm guessing that from my brain, but yeah, it's
so that's a much different kind of community feel.
Well, but if you look at the map of Beaver Creek concept plan, in order to get to the main part of town, you have to ride from the residential part through the industrial part. Or down Beaver Creek Road, which you have to do anyway. But if you want people to ride their bikes to Safeway or Fred Meyer or shopping or food or whatever on Malala Avenue, then it wouldn't be good to have it neck down where there's more truck traffic.
No, I think the staff's recommendation is to move forward with the wider bike lanes. The question is the right-of-way width going to change? Is the additional planter strip area or medium need to be amended if the planning commission does not want to fully extend the right-of-way to accommodate the larger bike lanes? And what's the push and pull on that? And what I'm hearing is there a differentiation between the more commercial area and the residential area.
Yeah, I mean, the other comment that I would make about it is the center median. If you're going through a commercial district where you have higher density on each side of the street and more activity and people walking around, then I wonder if you need the median in the middle of the street. But maybe that conversation has already happened. I don't know. I'm a little bit late to the conversation.
No, and I think this has been the interesting piece of implementing a 14-year-old plan, is that this did go through a fair amount of public process. And a preferred alternative was approved. Time has passed, and so we're looking at the plan with our 2020 eyes. And so what as staff, I'm making sure is if there is a perceived conflict with what we're doing today or how our codes are today, identify it, have the Planning Commission look at it, outreach to the community if needed, and then provide that recommendation. And so it's really a targeted look rather than kind of a wholesale look, just because we'd have to go back and have a lot more public engagement. That being said, if it's logical to have kind of a larger recommendation about the street section based on our 2020 lens, the City Commission may want to know that. But I'm always very targeted about how we are making these changes and if there's a real reason for it.
Right.
Let me ask something. Is it expected for some of the industrial and commercial traffic to go through the neighborhood areas?
No, most likely they will use Loader Road or potentially Myers Road to get onto the property.
If we have a bunch of medians and smaller intersections, those are really difficult for trucks to try to maneuver. That wouldn't be a good idea. The roads definitely need to look different in the commercial and industrial areas. So if you have one design that goes everywhere, that I understand that wouldn't work.
Yeah. You know, the individual subsections can be a little bit easier to be tweaked post-approval, but one thing that can't be tweaked post-code approval is the right-of-way width that we can exact. So if we said 86 feet, but we really needed 88 feet, it's hard to get those 2 extra feet. If we ask for 86 feet, but we only need 84 feet, that's okay. It's easier to go down. I think the question I always have, and that kind of goes to the width of the street, which is you can ask for a larger street width. You still have to make the findings of why it's appropriate for your area and the public process. But it may not be the right width to build. That being said, more direction you give us at this level, the better, especially even direction if there's a point in time for modifying things, or as we get to development applications, either, if there's even policy directions about if reductions made, we want to do this. These are things that we can pass on and even amend in the plan, but I don't think we're really in a place where we want to wholesale redesign all the streets. So I'm kind of looking for specific direction. So far I've heard a little concern of potentially a commercial-oriented collector street design and a residentially-oriented collector street design. But what I haven't heard is kind of direction on the width accommodation for. And so I can work with those 2 comments, I can work with our Public Works Department and return with their recommendation.
So the bottom line is that we need an extra 6 feet.
Right.
And that can either come some combination of expanding the right-of-way or narrowing the planter strips to the median.
Right, 6 to 9 feet.
6 to 9 feet.
What is the current width of the planters?
7.5 feet.
7.5?
Is a general collector level.
Can we see the cross section of the street again? How wide is the median?
Well, once again, in the Beaver Creek Road concept plan, they didn't identify numerics for each of the cross sections, so we guessed on the right-hand side based on what we thought an 86-foot right-of-way meant. But they didn't, and I realize why they don't is because when you adopt it and it's a specificity, and you need to, and times change, you need to tweak things, you don't want to be constrained. So I understand why they did that as a document. But right now, 86 feet doesn't give you those wider,
I would like to offer just a kind of a comment about quality of life of walking down the street. And if we believe, and I think we do, is that the quality of life of walking down the street. I personally think that the bike lane and the sidewalks are the two most important things to consider. You know, the bike lane having the safety it needs and the access, and then the sidewalk where everyone's walking. Hopefully we have a lot of people walking on our sidewalks. That's an important piece of this too, as where the planting, I think, is the most flexible part of it.
Yeah.
And I also think it all needs to be balanced with the width of the entire right-of-way, because if you sort of make that wider and wider and wider, then that puts a lot of limitations on the development potential of, the private properties.
Right.
So was 86 feet the original, what everybody has seen in the concept plan? Everybody's expecting 86 feet?
That's what's adopted today.
That's what's adopted, all right.
Mm-hmm. I would think narrow that down.
Okay, gotta narrow it down. I think having more than you need and not needing to use it is always better. That's my opinion.
Well, it's going to get used. Whatever the width is, they're going to use the whole thing.
Gives you more options if you've got more room. Yeah. You can make a much wider bike lane. You can move the bike lane away from the cars completely. There's just more options.
Mm-hmm.
I think the bike should be with the people, but we're not here to discuss that. We're here to discuss the width of the.
I staunchly oppose that.
Right away. I know. Yeah. What if you put it over here away from the cars? But we're not talking about that.
Yeah.
So in this particular cross section, there is no on-street parking? Or would it be in between these areas?
Yeah, what they've done is where it says parking lane,
Yeah.
it's actually a combination of parking lane, and then sometimes it's the
Planter.
the planter and the stormwater planter.
All right. Okay.
So imagine, if you will, if you're looking from down, there may be sections where a stormwater planter gets extended, almost like a curb extension,
Right.
and then the parking is reduced.
Right.
So they're kind of seen as both options are allowed in that section.
Yeah. Is there also a way to as the application progresses and as this area of the city develops more through this process, that we can have the applicant submit more detailed drawings and sections showing what this all looks like, and that we'll have an ability to kind of keep the discussion going till...
Only if it's a type 3 process. So the key thing with this is if an applicant chooses to go through a planning commission review because they want to do a master plan,
Master plan PUD.
then this conversation can happen. But as part of our clear and objective housing requirements, we need to provide a clear and objective path.
Mm-hmm.
And so with a clear and objective path, we have to provide clear and objective directions.
Yep.
And so if an applicant wants to just do a subdivision, really it is legally looking at a table and telling them this is what you're building.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, so we're here to decide recommendation on right-of-way width.
I'll go back to...
What kind of consensus do we have? Do we have one?
So I have another question. So
sure.
The median width, at some point you're going to have to break up the median for left turn lanes.
Oh, yeah. So just
So the median width has to be
10.
Yeah, it has to be the width of a turn lane. So we can't get anything out of the median.
No, but there is a question. You can, if you, let's say you have a skinnier median, let's say like a 5-foot or 6-foot median. What you do is you start in the transition of the intersection, taking away on-street parking from the side, and that's how you get, just like you see today, if you have a street that doesn't have enough width for a turn lane, you steal it with removing the on-street parking, and then in that section you get, and it's a couple of bays of on-street parking, and that's how you get the turn lane. So it'd probably be the same thing. If it's less than 10 feet at intersections, you probably would have less on-street parking closer to the intersection in order to accommodate that.
Is 86 feet the typical?
No, because we don't have center medians in our collector streets.
Right.
So how does this 86 feet compare to what's in a residential neighborhood?
56 feet is our new local street.
It's bigger because the idea of the concept plan was based on sustainability, and having planting areas and shade on the trees was part of it.
Yeah, I was just looking at,
Oh,
how does it compare size-wise? They're not all gonna be 86 foot wide. It's gonna be 86 on the collectors.
Yeah,
And residentials will be down to,
54?
yeah, our standard local street is 54. We'll have to look up what your residential is.
Do we have a street in the city we can compare it to?
No.
How wide's Malala Avenue?
What part?
You have to tell me that before the meeting. So, collectors.
I'm grabbing the code a second.
your question was good about Myers Avenue.
Myers Road's good, but there's no median.
Well, there is a median in a lot of that. Now, that used to be High School Lane or whatever. They've changed it now. And they have a planter in the median. And you've got
that's part of Myers.
And you've got your 2 lanes of traffic, and then you've got parking on the outside, on both sides.
Right, that
and then
seems
you
very
have
wide.
sidewalks outside of that. And again, that's not 100% of.
Right, but it's something we can envision.
Right.
But any idea how wide that is?
Pardon?
Any idea how wide that is?
I just drove over to
seems
high
very
school
wide.
the other day, and I don't know what the width is.
So does the planning, it sounds like,
Open up 16 on me.
are you guys looking at a combination? So you have, I guess, 3 options. One, if, it sounds like we know that we want the wider bike lanes. Is that right?
Right, we just don't know if we want to
Everyone's
make the
good with
road
that?
much wider or the right of way much wider to accommodate that.
Yeah, can you mute that?
Oh, we're trying to bring up the
Yeah, I know.
Title 16.
I'm trying to type
Just
in
on the
address.
computer.
For an example, there's 11 of these panels. I'm assuming they're 4 feet wide, so that would be from that panel to the corner of the room.
Just go to the city website and go find them.
Yeah, I gotta change the.
Just trying to picture driving on it.
Computer.
Well, it's just a single lane as far as you're driving.
So-
Single lane with bike lane.
Yeah,
Okay,
as far
so-
as how much
so-
room we have for everything, because we need a sidewalk, bike lanes, parking, median, travel lanes. I'm just trying to picture a road we can compare that to, because we're looking at a picture, but it's hard to envision that.
Right.
So Myers Road by the high school, any idea how wide that is?
No, but I can figure out for you.
Okay, is that a residential collector, or how is that classified?
I'll look on my computer, give me a second.
Okay, I appreciate
But, so the fundamental question, it sounds like, is, should we
Yeah.
expand the roadway
Books over
or
there.
take land from the vegetative areas, whether it's the center median, the, whatever it is?
Yep.
Right.
Upsides down.
Is there, aside from comparisons of other
plug
streets
that in
and those sizes, is there anything that we can help provide you to inform that decision? Or are you feeling
That's all I
pulled in
need.
one direction?
I mean, it's just a math problem as far as I'm
Back
concerned.
Yeah.
to your Myers Road. As I recall, there's no bicycle travel lane there anyplace. The bicycle shares the road with the cars.
I think I'd have to look at a Google Street View to even remember what that looks like right now.
Yeah, next time you go that way, turn down at the high school and
But we're trying, you know,
Do
as
you
far
ever
as,
drive in Portland?
I try not to.
Fair enough. But do you? Yeah, okay. Have you ever been up Williams? Like going from Rose Center? Okay.
I'm sure I
Williams is
have.
basically half of what this is, of what's being described, but it's,
Isn't Williams one way?
it is, yeah.
Okay.
So it's half
I
of,
think it's.
except there's
Is it
sidewalk.
one way?
No, so it's sidewalk, parking, 5-foot bike lane, 3-foot buffer, travel lane, and then parking on the other side.
Okay.
So
Which road is that?
Williams from Broadway to wherever it ends at.
and that
Killingsworth
must
or
be
something.
86, pretty close to 86.
No, it's half of it. So it's half of what we're talking about, basically.
So Myers Road, right by the high school, south of the high school, is 80 feet
80 feet. Seems like a lot of room.
of right-of-way total.
Does it have a bicycle lane on there, or do they share the road traffic?
It'd be silly for a road by a high school to not have bicycle lanes.
I don't recall it. I don't go that way very often, but I was over there the other day.
It does have bike lanes, and it also has center medians in this section that I measured.
There is bike lanes?
Does it say how wide the center median is?
Seems wide.
So it varies a little bit with intersections like Christina was talking about, but 1 second, let me measure. And I'm just sort of south of the ball
and
field.
real quickly, to provide additional direction, we have in our code requirements for each of the different classifications. And I can tell you, we as a city have not updated our preferred bike lane width. So this, in a sense, what you're giving direction is kind of ahead of the curve. This is kind of leading kind of that new direction of expanded bikes. So right now, most of our bike widths are 6 feet in our code today. So take that for, this is if the city may be amending in the future, but right now, a mixed-use commercial or public collector street is 86 feet, so it's the same. It has 10-foot sidewalks with tree wells, so the same thing as 5 and 5. And it has, hold on. Those are not adding up, so those are the recommended probably minimum. So if I add up all the minimums, they won't add up to the 86. There's a little bit of spare.
And Myers Road looks like it's a 6-foot bike lane. The center median's about 12 feet.
I'd like to suggest that we as a commission, suggest that we take dimension out of the center median and give it to the bike lane.
Sorry.
Either the center median or a combination of the center median and the planters.
Yeah.
And give it to the bike lane and keep the right of way the same width.
And we would recommend the flexibility, just say out of the vegetation part, so either or, and then when we go through development, we can figure it out.
I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
You trade some footage here and there, but you end up with 86.
Yeah.
So you're not recommending any expansion to the width of the right-of-way?
What did your survey said? Wasn't it the highest rate to say?
Well, it's a non-scientific survey.
I know, yeah.
What I have is this.
But you put some value in there, you know, they're not.
I think the value is you have a majority, well over a majority of people recommending to do something to allow for wider, safer lanes. I think that's kind of the biggest one one thing I got out of this is there wasn't 50 people saying don't add wider bike lanes.
Mm-hmm. And then you could rely on the past planning process or the creation of a plan to have established those right-of-way widths, and then you're just kind of playing around with what's on the inside.
So that would give flexibility to determine the precise right-of-way width.
It sounds like the recommendation is to keep the right-of-way as previously determined in the concept plan creation, and then make the bike lanes wider to accommodate our expectations of today, and take that square footage from either the median or the landscapes on the side.
Yeah, and one thing we are doing as part of the concept plan is we're having a couple-page addendum in the front, which will be renamed Thimble Creek Concept Plan, and then some additional policies that are being refined. And so it's that direction. Even though it's 86 feet, there can be further direction about where to take the, how to support, protected and expanded bike lanes by removing the vegetation to account for that. As well as the recommendation that, if a collector street is not meeting the targets for the transportation study, that it meets the volumes of the collector street for residential that we build as a local. So that's another thing we'll be adding to the recommendation package. Only because you don't want to be at a place where an applicant has turned in an application, none of the traffic volumes are even suggesting a collector level traffic. And then the city doesn't know quite what to do to bring it down to local. This gives kind of clear direction that it should go to local.
Okay. All right, and that was the only thing that you needed?
That was the thing I needed. So what I'm going to come back, so just to reiterate, I'm hearing no change in width to the collector.
Correct.
But a policy sentence in the amended concept plan that talks about that there is a support for larger expanded width of bike lanes, and that it should be modified by removing vegetation sections as needed to accommodate it.
Correct.
Okay.
Did that also include the protected bike lanes or just the wider bike lane?
I think wider, that can be, it's either the 8 foot or the 9.5 foot. I think right now the Public Works Department is not really at a place to identify their recommended design because they have a lot more work to do in-house.
All right. I don't know if the city looked into this, but there are examples of protected bike lanes. Are there examples of protected bike lanes that fit into the right-of-way widths that we're working with?
They would if we removed vegetation.
Okay. I know that's important to Commissioner Mitchell, so I want to keep that
And just to remind everybody, the Pearl portion, I always remind people that we're also planning this linear park. So the east side of that north-south street that the linear park is located on, to be determined. For the section that is the Pearl and Strings, the string portion will be a pedestrian bike shared use path. So in that section, there actually you'll be transferring, in a sense, the planter strip and sidewalk to that shared use path. So, but just in the section on the east side where there's the string part of the Pearl and String. So you don't need to adopt that. It's kind of just overplays a shared use path. Well, then you don't need to have a 5 foot planter, 5 foot sidewalk, and then a shared use path. So they would be designed together.
Right. Okay. Cool.
All right.
Any more questions?
That's all I have.
Okay. Make a motion.
To continue the meeting to the agenda item until February 24th.
February 24th.
Okay. Anyone care to make that motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion that we stay with the 86 feet and we increase the size of the bicycle paths and reduce the size of the vegetation to the median.
That's our recommendation, and we continue the...
Okay, which one?
Yeah, that one.
LAG 19-3.
Second.
To February 24th
February 24th.
at 7 p.m.
Okay, Commissioner Stoll, second.
Now, this is a recommendation.
It's a recommendation.
Yeah. Going up
and
to
a continuance.
Yep.
Okay.
Commissioner Staggs?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Schleifer?
Aye.
Commissioner Gage?
Aye.
Commissioner Stoll?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on. Agenda item number 4, communications.
All right, I don't really have much for you. We are going to have a meeting on February 24th, which is our next meeting. We're only going to have 2 items on that agenda, so it should be sort of back to normal. Thank you for bearing with us as we got a little bit busy. We are going to be closed also Monday, February 17th, which is this upcoming Monday for President's Day. So we'll be getting you your agenda packet before Monday, a little bit early this time. Okay.
All right.
That's all.
That's it. We're done. We're adjourned.